I was wondering, sir, have your travels in nations around the world affected your view of freedom? Has like living in China, for example, affected that?
Growing up in China, where I lived through the Japanese War and various atrocities, on the one hand it gave me a tremendously realistic view of human life. We're all going to die, and any of us may suffer. On the other hand, it gave me an incredible appreciation of freedom. In other words, if you see countries where it's brutally oppressed, you realize how precious it is, and it's not just a slogan. So yes, I would say definitely.
I was wondering, you mentioned positive and negative freedom. And I was wondering, has a nation made that transition from negative to positive freedom? And that you described, and how that might have been managed? If not, though, how could it be done?
The idea, those phrases go back to Isaiah Berlin, who's the big Jewish philosopher at Oxford, who was originally Russian. And I think it's a very good thing. Now, some people choose this one or that one, negative or positive. You need both. Negative freedom is the preliminary to positive freedom. Clearly, every revolution achieves the negative. You throw off the ancien regime, and now you're free. But nations that don't think what it is to go on to the positive, and that's where your founders were very different. They understood the positive thing. Or put it differently, there's a paradox of freedom. The greatest enemy of freedom is freedom. And the reason is that freedom needs self-restraint. But self-restraint is precisely what freedom undermines when it flourishes. And freedom spirals down to permissiveness, do what you like, and to license and then chaos and so on. So the framers understood all that. So they knew you needed positive freedom. You need to order freedom with the Constitution, but also with civic education. Or put it in the Greek way, the Greeks knew in Athens there were three possibilities for citizens. You could be idiots, or tribespeople, or citizens. Now the idiot was not the nutcase. The idiot was the person who only thought of himself. I, myself, and me. And we got a lot like that in America today. And for citizens, that's an idiot. Then the second problem was what they called the tribespeople, the people who only thought in their tribe. The Republican tribe, Democratic tribe, the people who watch Fox News, or the people who watch Rachel Maddow on MSNBC. And each is a sort of tribe and a bubble and so on. They only think that way. Nothing the other side says is ever right. Now, the citizen for the Greeks was not an idiot, not a tribesperson. He was a citizen. He had his own interests, and it was his, sadly. They were men, not women. But they also thought of the common good, what was important for Athens as a whole. That's what's missing today. People say, I'm concerned about this, but America has to be taken into consideration. Now, the framers understood all those discussions, and that was the idea of the freedom they set up that I described as the Golden Triangle.
So more was like Kennedy would say, not what America can be for you, but what you can do for America.
Yeah, and Kennedy saying that as a liberal in his time, everyone would have taken that for granted. And there was many things that he said in 1960 is simply gone today. So he virtually quoted Jefferson. I can't remember Jefferson exactly right. Jefferson said, can the liberties of a nation be considered secure? I'm quoting from memory rather loosely, if they're not understood as a gift of God. Now Kennedy quoted that. No current liberal would quote that. And you can see, since the 60s, the culture warring has really removed some of the self-evident, taken for granted assumptions of America that all Americans would have agreed with before, but no longer do.
I was wondering what your thoughts about the recent sequestration.
I'd take a broad European, and I know it's wider than Europe. They say, how can a great nation conduct its affairs like this? I mean, Washington is in massive gridlock and paralyzing itself in ways that are just plain stupid. Now, the president used that word about the other side, but the odd thing is, the evidence is the idea of sequestration was his idea, and now he's pretending it isn't. So there's a huge amount of stupidity and sadly deception in Washington, and I think it's a shameful way for the world's #1 society to be conducting its affairs. Washington at the moment is bitter chaos. How do you sustain freedom? Freedom has never been sustained in a lasting way. So the framers' solution, I think, is the most daring in all history. I don't know anything approaches it. But many Americans don't even know it today. And so it's partly neglect. It's not taught in schools, it's not taught in families, partly neglect, but partly you've got deliberate opposition. And I mentioned people who look at the framers with their blind spots. The treatment of slaves, nothing they say should be considered. Whereas I think their treatment of slaves was horrendous. Their treatment of women was rather poor. But when you come to, say, religious freedom, they're incredibly advanced. And they got it almost right from the very beginning. And it's we who've messed a lot of their ideas up. So you've got to be much more discriminating in terms of the framers. They're good here, they're not good there. And where they're not good, ignore them. But where they are good, respect them. But modern Americans either neglect them or openly dismiss them. I mean, not long ago, George Washington was mentioned, and one particular congressman, thinking in a postmodern way, objected to the reference to George Washington in the congressional record. Well, that's how stupid it's become, in terms of the framers.
I just wanted to ask, you're not an American citizen, you're from another nation, and I was wondering, from that point of view, how is America doing in the continuation of our freedoms? Mm-hmm. And from our founding fathers?
Mm-hmm. Well, let me say why it's sometimes easier to see things from the outside. Rudyard Kipling has a wonderful little line, "What knows he of England, who only England knows?" In other words, like the old Chinese saying, why is the fish the last thing to ask if you want to know what water is? The fish only knows water, and it's self-evident, the only surrounding it has. And in the same way, a lot of English people don't understand England because they only know England. A lot of Americans don't really understand America because they don't see it with outside or historical eyes. And so it helps. You see things freshly when you see them first, and you come in as an outsider and go, what? And you suddenly see them startlingly. But I do think as an outsider, and you've got the two greatest outside thinkers are Tocqueville, the Frenchman, and Lord James Bryce at the end of the 19th century. He was equally interesting. Bryce, who was Queen Victoria's ambassador, lived here for a long time, he said religion in America is so important to America that if it goes, America will be in trouble. And he put it like this: Europe has two things that hold it together, even if its traditions go. One is it has tradition, and the other is it has tight social living conditions, small villages, small towns. America, he said, is so open, so free, so mobile, that if religion goes, he said, he predicted, quote, the completest revolution of all. In other words, there'd be nothing to hold America together. And that's where we are today. I think America is approaching the place of an unsustainable freedom that will inevitably decline.
All right, those are my questions for today. Thank you very much, sir.
You're welcome.